You're listening to AV Marketing, a podcast that curates stories and perspectives on how B2B and professional services firms use audio and video in their marketing. I'm your host, John Tyerman. Hi, gang. Welcome to another episode of AV Marketing. We have a very interesting and important show for you today. We're talking trademarks, people. Should you trademark your podcast name? First, I'm going to break down what a trademark is, why it's important, some key things to know about registering your podcast brand trademark, and what you should do if you received a cease and desist letter. Then you're going to hear from Rhondalynn Korolak, former lawyer and chartered accountant, author, keynote speaker, master coach, and the host of the Financial Foreplay podcast. Rhondalynn was a guest on the Visible Expert podcast years ago when she shared her story about how she became a well-known expert in the financial services space. And recently she went through litigation in a trademark infringement of her podcast, and she agreed to share her story with me. It's pretty remarkable. But first, a quick word. Chances are you've probably thought about what a podcast for your company would look like. You know it could help your marketing, but it has to be positioned the right way. It has to connect to your business goals. That's why I put together a free course on how to launch a business podcast. We'll explore how to connect your podcast to marketing objectives, considerations for your name, show format, setting up repeatable workflows for guest management, content production, and much, much more. Just go to redcedarmarketing.com, reach out to me on LinkedIn to learn more. All right, let's dive in. What is a trademark? Why is it important? A trademark is a type of intellectual property, and a podcast would fall under the category of IP because it's not something you can physically touch. So there are three types of protection when it comes to IP. There's patents, there's copyrights, and there's trademarks. Patents cover inventions, copyright covers content, and then trademarks protect your brand. An example of a trademark might include your business name, your logo, colors, even sounds like a jingle if it's associated with your brand. So that's what a trademark is. And it's important to protect your podcast in case someone else launches a podcast with the same name and then they have a claim to that, or they claim that you're infringing on their intellectual property. So that's why it's important to register for a podcast trademark. Now, that process can take anywhere from 9 to 18 months to complete. There can be many people using the same podcast name or title, but whoever registers it first has the legal right to use that trademark. And registering a trademark, it can cost anywhere between $200 and $600, depending on the specific requirements of your trademark. So if you want to register for a podcast trademark, go to the United States Patent and Trademark Office. That's www.uspto.gov/trademarks. And you can register for your podcast trademark there. All right, so what should you do if you receive a cease and desist letter? It can be kind of scary, but if you get one of these letters, seek legal advice. This is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer, but you should go and seek legal advice if you get one of these letters. And while one of those letters on its own doesn't have any legal authority, they're usually the first step to litigation in trademark law. So most people, if they get this kind of letter, upon realizing they're infringing on a trademark law, the common person would probably back off, right? But that wasn't the case when Rhondalynn Korolak sent multiple cease and desist letters when her Financial Foreplay brand was being used by an Instagram influencer giving shallow financial advice. This is a really interesting story. I'm excited to share it with you. Here's my interview with Rhondalynn. Rhondalynn, at the time of this recording, it's January 2024. You've just been through a rough trademark infringement court battle over the name of your podcast, Financial Foreplay. I'm excited to hear your story on that. But before we do, let's set the table a little bit for our listeners. Can you give a little bit of an overview of your business and then how your podcast fits into your strategy?
Yeah, so my business kind of started when I qualified as a lawyer and a chartered accountant in Canada many years ago. And I was working in oil and gas taxation of all places. And I happened to immigrate to Australia, and it was actually really difficult to get working permits here. So I ended up sort of pivoting, using my skills, but doing something slightly different with them. I worked for a number of companies. I was managing a huge coalition loyalty program that had 21 different brands in it. And I had to look at the data that we had from the card users and try to figure out how do we drive profitable growth in those businesses. And those businesses included Kmart and Target, Budget, Best Western, the biggest grocery store that we have over here. So it was a real good cross section of different businesses. And that's where I fell in love with coaching and working with businesses. And so basically, I decided to become a full-time cash flow expert and coach, working with businesses to sort of maximize their cash flow capabilities. And if they had working capital deficiencies, figure out strategies and ways that they could bridge those or fund those by going out into the marketplace, talking to banks and fintechs. So basically, my specialty is helping people make cash, which is good, right? Because it keeps businesses going. But through my journey, I happened to write this book called Financial Foreplay. So I've written about 5 different books, all in the sort of business genre primarily. But the book that I wrote that started off this whole thing was called Financial Foreplay. So it's a little bit of a shocking title for people. But the reason I did it, the reason I wrote it, is I know that people either two things: hate talking about money or are terrified to talk about their money. So I wrote Financial Foreplay because for me, it's about using what I know about brain friendly learning and coaching techniques to make stuff that's scary and intimidating fun, memorable, and interesting. So to me, it's not just a book title. It's a whole philosophy of how I do things differently. So when I'm teaching cash flow, it's not about teaching people how to use a forecasting tool. It's not about teaching them to become an accountant. For me, it's about sharing stories and pictures so that they understand what cash flow looks like. So I might use a bathtub or puppets or stuff that people just would not expect in finance. And so I'm super protective of my brand because to me, it's about something more than just money and finances. It's about making these things really accessible and interesting and memorable to other people. So when so this was in 2009, I wrote the book. A couple years later, I trademarked it. And then in 2020, this is right when COVID was hitting, June of 2020, I just happened to notice that some person I had never heard of in my life was using my, registered trademark to run her own podcast. And so, that's kind of how it started. And I thought, silly me, I thought because she's a fellow finance business professional that, if I just went to her and said, hey, we need to chat about this, perhaps you don't know I have a trademark, that we could just sort it all out really amicably and it would be super easy. But I was very, very wrong in that assumption.
I do want to get into the copyright infringement or the trademark infringement, excuse me. But I just want to back up to your podcast and how. So you wrote the book in 2009. When did you launch your Financial Foreplay podcast?
So I wasn't really podcasting. Podcasting wasn't something that was super on my radar really of things. How when I did the actual trademark registration, it was before podcasting was really big as well, right? So it wasn't on most people's radar. So I was protecting things like books, financial advice, money management, credit management, financial education, that sort of thing. So podcasting wasn't on my radar at all. I only started podcasting after the fact. It was actually even after her podcast. But to me, that wasn't the point because I wasn't actually raising a statement of claim to chase her because she was using it in a podcast. I took umbrage with the fact that she was using it to promote financial advice and education, sure, which I had clearly protected. And look, to be fair, this is the part that I find the most astounding of all of this. To be fair, I've been using that term pretty much exclusively globally since 2009. And really, no one has ever challenged me. I've never had to write a cease and desist letter. I've never had to threaten to take somebody else to court. It actually really shocked me because I think most people, when they hear the term financial foreplay, know that I have come up with it because, not only did I write books and sell thousands of those books, so I do speaking. I've been the national speaker for MYOB, which is an accounting software. I've toured with them and presented to 5,000 business owners in 1 month. I've toured with Intuit, not just in Australia, but also, I've presented in San Jose at their big conference in front of, hundreds and thousands of people, this brand. And so to me, most people know that I created it, I've trademarked it. And I think that, in the industry, by and large, bookkeepers, accountants, finance people are super respectful. It
Yeah.
wouldn't even cross their mind, I don't reckon, to take somebody else's stuff because it would be embarrassing. But she wasn't embarrassed at all. She was that embarrassment didn't even faze her. She felt entitled to use it. And that was the difference.
And so, because you trademarked that name to cover financial education, financial, was it advice?
Yeah,
Yeah.
credit management, money management.
And you were doing that through different mediums, your speaking gigs, your podcast, your book, the services that you offer
Yeah,
clients, your coaching
coaching
services.
people one-on-one. I mean, people, this is the interesting part for me is how this sort of all came about, because it was during, obviously COVID, is speaking had shut down. Right. So what happened
Oh, yeah.
was a lot of, speaking gigs had shut down or been rescheduled. And so most people at that time, and even still now, were finding me online. They were looking, maybe somebody saw my book somewhere or heard about it. They were typing in financial foreplay. But now what they were finding is her podcast, because for whatever reason, Google prioritizes podcasts. Right. So
Yeah.
when you do a Google search for something, if there's a podcast, it actually gets priority ranking. So the very first thing would happen would be AdWords. So somebody's advertising would show up, but then you'd see everything from podcasting, particularly Apple iTunes and Google results. And then below that is Facebook. Right. And she was also using it in Facebook. So if somebody did a Google search at that time for financial foreplay, her podcasts and her Facebook videos and posts were taking precedence on page one of Google over my legitimate, trademarked product.
It was either 2020 or 21 was a record year for podcasts being launched. And so that makes sense that, that there would be this influx of podcast shows in the market. Everyone, their uncle was doing it at the time. What was the role of, you used Podbean at the time,
Yeah. And so did she.
and so did they have any say? Did they help you out in this process? What was the role of some of the tech platforms as you were going through this?
Oh, look, Podbean is disgraceful. I would
Oh,
never recommend anybody use that brand. I don't like to disparage anybody, but look, I applied using, there's like a process to apply to have trademark material taken down. Every platform has one, right? So I applied using that normal mechanism, and I provided my trademark certificates. And then Podbean basically, went back to her and said, what do you think about this? And, if you don't answer, we're going to take your podcast down. So the very next thing that happened is I started getting legal threats. So her lawyer, her solicitor, instead of just saying, hey, we've got a problem here, there's a registered trademark, we can see certificates, they started denying the validity of my trademark. So based on, I don't know what, legal arguments this guy had in his head, I can't read his mind, but he started saying things like, your trademark's not valid. We're going to apply to IP Australia to have your trademark struck from the register as invalid. And the really thing that really I thought was fascinating is she went to IP Australia and put her name in front of Financial Foreplay and tried to trademark that for not only podcasting, but for financial advice and education. And so IP Australia, and this was all in sort of November of 2020. So IP Australia gets back to her quick smart. They gave her two letters, one 9th of December 2020 and one on the 12th of January 2021. And in the letters, not only do they point out my valid pre-existing trademark, they happen to say, look, you can't just put your name in front of somebody else's trademark, because the dominant and unique element of this thing is financial foreplay, not your name. It's financial foreplay. It belongs to someone else, and you are trying to register it for the exact same classes of goods and services, being financial advice and education, right? And the other, so this, this was all kind of going on. But the thing that really put me over the edge is, after these, we call them adverse examination reports. So IP Australia writes an adverse examination report and then basically rejects your application. They were in possession of these pieces of paper. They could not have reasonably believed that they had any right whatsoever to use my trademark, because they were being rejected by IP Australia. Despite that, they went to Podbean, to Facebook, and to Apple iTunes, of all places, and told them in writing, and it was a quote, that she had the legal right to use my trademark, right? And their argument was that I didn't have the podcasting class at that time, which I do now, but I didn't have it at this time, that I didn't have the podcasting. And their argument was a financial planner using my brand, my trademark in a podcast that was financial and accounting advice wasn't. That it was just inspirational material. Inspirational stories and material, and it didn't constitute financial advice or education. And I understand that in addition to that, a legal declaration was even signed with Facebook. And a legal declaration is actually pretty serious stuff, right? So when you sign a legal declaration, you're essentially saying you're swearing to something. So it's a sworn statement, and you can face an action for perjury for making an inaccurate declaration. Now, the judge noted, and this is important, the judge noted in his decision that when they were telling these platforms like Podbean, Facebook, and iTunes that they had legal rights they did not have, they neglected to tell them they'd been knocked back twice by IP Australia. They just omitted that. And let's be honest, if you've been told you are rejected and you can't use it because it's the same or deceptively similar to someone's pre-existing trademark, withholding that information is like lying, isn't it? Because it's a material aspect of your claim. If you're going to say you got a legal right and you withhold the fact that IP Australia told you that you don't have any legal rights, then to me, that's not an accurate statement. It's deceptive. It's misleading. And, that's the part that was really tough, because if Facebook, Podbean, and iTunes had simply taken the content down, there wouldn't have been a statement of claim raised in the court or a trial. Because all along, all I've been trying to do is get it to stop, and also an undertaking to remove the content. But it continued. I mean, we're not just talking a couple months here. The infringing content was sitting on the Podbean platform. Like it said, www.podbean.com/episode ABC. And there were 26 or more of them. They were sitting there until at least April of 2022. So that's almost 2 years later. These podcast episodes are still sitting there. And, I couldn't get them taken down. The only way that I could get it to stop, that I could get it to be taken down, was by me taking this to court and trying to get an adjudication of the matter, or, possibly mediation. But I did offer to mediate. I asked for it, and she refused.
Wow. This is an incredible story. And you mentioned, I think it was before we started recording, that she had a decent social media following, and she, I don't activated her followers or encouraged her followers to go after you on social media. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, look, I don't know exactly how it happened, and remember, I didn't really know who she was, but she had about maybe 30,000 followers or something on Instagram. and about
Oh, wow.
120 on YouTube. So she had quite a few people. And what started happening is these people started coming to my Instagram and calling me things like a thief and a
Mm.
liar, and you've misrepresented your legal rights. And people were just, calling me a scammer, and they were attacking me. And I thought, this is really weird, right? So I started looking into who these people were. Now, one of these people, the person who said I misrepresented my legal rights, was her talent manager. I could be wrong, but I don't think this guy's an IP lawyer, right? Like, I think, maybe he's a talent manager, maybe he's good at what he does, but he's no IP lawyer. So the only way that he could have an opinion like that I'm misrepresenting my legal rights, would be that he must have spoken to somebody, right? And that somebody is likely to be the person who was infringing on my trademark rights. And, I just found it interesting. I also had her podcast production guy said I stole from his client. And I'm thinking, stole what? All I'm trying to do is in a, wholly reasonable way. Like, never once did I make any in heavy-handed threats that I was going to sue her for stuff that she didn't do. I mean, everything I was saying was based in law. So I had a right to enforce, my rights. And the interesting part is that even Podbean and, even the judge said that I was wholly within my rights to go to Podbean and Facebook and ask all those people to take it down because I was the legitimate holder. So I can't possibly be sued. But the thing that really put me over the edge is another podcaster who is actually even more well known over here for finance sent me a screenshot. And in that screenshot, I saw that, she had posted on her Instagram that she was being cyber bullied and harassed. She made claims that, it was so bad that she was going to have to get an intervention order to protect the safety of her family. Like, it was a huge sob story. And when I first read it, I thought, well, she's not named me, and I haven't actually, spoken to her in any way. So it can't possibly be me. So here's me in my naivety. I'm thinking, well, she must be in a dispute with somebody else because it can't possibly be me because I haven't even, spoke to her. How could I cyberbully somebody I've never had any contact with? But interestingly enough, I started scrolling through some of the comments. And one of the comments came from a woman in Sydney. There was this woman in Sydney, and this was all on Instagram, that 2 days prior, I had asked her really nicely to please take down some content that included the Financial Foreplay podcast and this person who was using it because I was, trying to enforce and defend my trademark. And she was lovely. She actually took the content down right away. There was no problems. But in the comments, the person who posted all this, I'm being cyberbullied, wah, 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 feel bad for me, poor me, wrote a comment to this exact woman that I had spoken to only 2 days earlier and said, I'm so grateful that the platforms knew the law and, knew the law and the facts and didn't take my content down. And I was like, that sounds exactly like me. That sounds like she's talking about me. And so then I put, join the dots and put two and two together. But I couldn't be 100% sure that that post was about me until we subpoenaed some documents in the middle of the trial. And when we got the documents, to my horror, she and her lawyers, and I can't remember, like, I need to actually think about this because I can't remember if it was just her that said it or if it was also her lawyers that were in on it. I suppose I think it might have only been her, actually told the platforms that I had been cyberbullying and harassing her. Now, she has no evidence of any of this because you can't harass somebody by purely just asking for content to be taken down pursuant to legal mechanisms. And if the person never texted you, never emailed you, never spoke to you on the telephone, you can't have cyberbullying and harassment. But I was floored because you have to remember, I do business with these people. I was a customer of these platforms, and she's out there telling them that I'd cyberbullied and harassed her I believe, in an attempt to make them feel sorry for her so that they wouldn't take the material down. So not only was what she's saying to them not even correct in trademark law, And that's my favorite. My favorite part of the trial was when the judge intervened in the middle of the trial, because the judge can ask whatever he wants, right? The judge can
Sure.
pop in anytime he wants. And he's like, hold on a second here. He goes, in this, communication with Facebook or whoever it was at the time, what you're saying here isn't even correct based on trademark law. So if what you said is based on, advice you got from your lawyers gave you bad advice. And the judge made her barrister have to basically admit that, concede it.
To make those claims, those wild claims, it seems like this is you've completely wandered into the absurd.
Yeah,
with that, it
Like,
seems.
I don't think that like Hollywood, right, could even conceive
Seriously.
of something as ridiculous as this, because you just wouldn't expect it. A normal, scenario would be that the person gets the cease and desist. And don't forget, I actually sent her two, and she ignored both of those. And then I had to, about maybe another 12 months later, I had to send another cease and desist to a media company in Sydney, because during the point where I was already suing her, she was being promoted to speak at a conference for financial advisors in Sydney and in Melbourne. And they were using my brand, Financial Foreplay.
Oh man.
And she was going to talk about how much money she'd made from her podcast, right? So this woman is sitting in court arguing that she didn't make any money from her podcast, but yet this speaking announcement from Momentum Media in Sydney said she's going to tell everybody how to make money, from how she made money from her podcast. And I'm thinking, is this real? And then she, under oath when she testified, this is funny stuff. Under oath when she testified, she said that Momentum Media had made a mistake and that they had never hired her to speak about that. But coincidentally, we'd subpoenaed her talent manager to get the documents. So we said, like, give us the contract, give us the invoice, give us the rate card, how you negotiated this, give us the speaker bio so we can see who gave the speaker bio that had my brand in it, and also give us any communications about what you were hired to speak about. And they ignored the subpoena. So they never ever produced the document. So if you're on the stand saying that somebody else infringed and somebody made a mistake and that's not what you were hired to speak about, do you willingly withhold all of the correspondence and documents that would prove that what you're saying is true? Probably not, right?
No.
Probably not. I mean, look, I could be wrong.
Any rational person wouldn't.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I can't say for sure, but I just find it coincidental that the exact documents that we subpoenaed were never provided. And they would have proven definitively who sent that bio, and they would have proven definitively what she was hired to speak about, right? And then another month later, which was April 2022, we cease and desisted Podbean. And Podbean finally froze her account and told her that they weren't going to unfreeze it until she took the podcast episodes down. So there was actually 4 cease and desist letters that went out on this case. And
I guess fourth time's the charm, right?
Yeah, apparently. Like, if only I knew, I would have issued 4 right in a row, all the way back in
exactly.
November, December of 2020.
And this is going on for 3 years. You've been dealing with this, and finally, what was it? Just a week or so ago, the courts ruled that she was found guilty of trademark infringement. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just right before Christmas.
Where do you go from here?
Look, that's a really good question, because this is tiring, right? Like, I've had
what I'm trying to do, Rhondalynn, is I'm trying to get us to, beyond the clouds. We're at clear blue skies. Everything's back to the way that it should be. What does that look like for you, your business, your podcast, and the like?
Yeah. Well, look, 2 things I want to do is I'm going to definitely relaunch Financial Foreplay. So I'm going to be going out with a really different, like fresh and new, unique approach to this thing. So I'm changing the format of the way that I'm going to do the podcast. We might actually add video on top of it. I'm going to get a different type of guest to come in. I may even expand the scope. So typically I try to stay in my lane, right? So the person that did this is more of a financial planner. And so her focus is kind of on a lot of personal finances. It could be talking about retirement, wealth creation. I'm over here in a different lane, really concentrating on businesses and cash flow and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually expand my scope slightly. So I'm not a financial planner. I'm not going to give people, that type of advice, but I can talk to them about a lot of other aspects. So we're going to start covering some topics that, are important to people and impact people in a financial way, but aren't necessarily financial advice. So talking to people about affording their kids private school, dealing with parents that are aging and the cost of that, putting them into homes or putting them into facilities or getting them care, orthodontics, like all the types of things that, just the rest of us have to deal with in our normal business. We'll probably expand the scope of it a little bit to include that. And I'm also thinking, and this is like a huge kind of red herring, or I don't know if I'm speaking out of school yet, or if I'll actually follow through on this, but I'm seriously thinking about starting a completely new podcast along the vein of, David and Goliath battles or against all odds. And I'm going to not only share my stories of how I've overcome some pretty unusual circumstances and tragedies in my life, and also inviting guests on, I'd love to get some fantastic guests on to talk about how they overcame, the Goliath battle in their life. And so that's more personal. But I think that, I would still share some of these stories. I'd share my trademark story. I'd also go back and share some of the stories that I don't know if I've ever told you about this before, that my mom was murdered. And when I was younger. And so I had to testify against my own brother. And there were 3 16-year-old kids that were all convicted of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. So I like to talk a little bit about that and share that in the hope that it might inspire some other people, and then get on other people to the podcast so they can share their stories, so that I can be inspired a little bit. And, our listeners can be inspired too. I mean, that's more personal, I guess, than it is financial foreplay. But I think that these stories of overcoming enormous odds are really, really important to share, because they humanize everyone. Like, everyone's got their struggles. Everyone's got stuff that is holding them back, stuff that is, making it tough for them to get up every day and face the day. And if we share those together and we talk about them, they lift us up. They give us some hope that, this person went through this horrible thing, and this is how they came out the other end. Maybe I can do that too. And so, I don't know why I'm being drawn that way, but.
Well, I'm convinced that survival is the key to business success. So, surviving this 3+ year long battle in courts over someone infringing on a brand that you created a decade plus ago, right? That's just a testament to who you are and how you're able to overcome all these challenges. So, Rhondalynn, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. For folks that are listening to this podcast right now, where can they find you?
Look, the easiest is just look up Rhondalynn, because there's only probably one of me. It's an unusual name. So if you just type in Rhondalynn, you're likely to find. But also you can find me via Financial Foreplay. I've written a few books: Sales Seduction, Pricing Value, On the Shoulders of Giants. But Financial Foreplay is the one that really, I think, sticks in most people's minds. That's really the brand that I think most people know me by. So just, find me that way, and you'll notice that now I'm dominating page 1 of Google. So it's not that hard, to find me, but you can hook up with me on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn.
All the different social channels. Excellent. Well, yeah. Rhondalynn, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you have any questions or want to learn more about launching your own business podcast, go to redcedarmarketing.com or reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Till next time.